Convicted serial killer and sex offender Jeffrey Dahmer murdered 17 males between 1978 and 1991. He was killed in 1994 by a fellow prison inmate. Who was Jeffrey Dahmer? On May 21, 1960, Jeffrey Dahmer was born in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, to parents Lionel and Joyce Dahmer. Up until the age of 4, when surgery to treat a double hernia seemed to affect a change in the boy, he was described as an active and cheerful child. Following the birth of his younger brother and the family's repeated movements, he grew noticeably more reclusive. He was uptight, disengaged, and largely friendless by the time he was a teenager. However, it seems that the dissolution of his parents' marriage and their contentious divorce a few years later may have been the spark for converting these thoughts into deeds. Dahmer states that his compulsions toward necrophilia and murder began around the age of 14. Dahmer's alcohol habit had run amok by the time of his first murder. His recently stepmom suggested that he join the army, so he left Ohio State University after just 1 quarter. Late in December 1978, Dahmer enrolled, and shortly after, he was assigned to Germany. His drinking issue persisted, and the army discharged him in the beginning of 1981. Although German officials later looked into possible connections between Dahmer and murders that happened nearby at the time, it is not thought that he committed any more killings while he was a member of the military. Dahmer went back to his Ohio home after receiving his discharge. Dahmer's father sent him to live with his grandmother in Wisconsin when he was arrested later that year for disorderly behavior. But his drinking problem persisted, and he was arrested for indecent exposure the following summer. Victims: 17 men were killed by Dahmer between 1978 and 1991. He took care to choose outcast victims, who were frequently vagabonds or borderline criminals, so that their disappearances would go unnoticed and lessen the chance that he would be apprehended. He used promises of money or sex to entice them to his house, where he strangled them to death. He performed sex acts on their bodies and kept images and body pieces as souvenirs. Just a few months after graduating from high school, in June 1978, Dahmer killed his first person when he picked up Stephen Hicks, a hitchhiker, and drove him to his parents' house. After getting the young guy intoxicated, Dahmer killed Hicks by punching him in the head and strangled him when he attempted to flee. The body parts of Dahmer's first victim were dissected, placed in plastic bags, and buried near his parents' house. Later, he unearthed the corpse, used a sledgehammer to break up the bones, and dispersed them across a wooded valley. Dahmer murders Stephen Tuomi, his second victim, until September 1987. After checking into a hotel room and having a few drinks, Dahmer ultimately woke up to discover Tuomi dead and without any memory of what had happened the night before. To get Tuomi's body to his grandmother's basement, he purchased a sizable suitcase. There, he dismembered Tuomi's body and masturbated on it before discarding the pieces. In September 1989, Dahmer had a very lucky escape. After meeting a 13-year-old Laotian kid, Dahmer was accused of second-degree sexual assault and sexual exploitation. He admitted wrongdoing and said the youngster had seemed much older. The aspiring model Anthony Sears was seduced, drugged, strangled, sodomized, photographed, dismembered, and then disposed of by Dahmer in March 1989. Dahmer was the epitome of repentance at his child molestation trial in May 1989, eloquently pleading in his own defense about how he had seen the wrong of his ways and that his arrest had been a turning point in his life. The judge gave Dahmer a 1-year jail sentence on day release, enabling him to work at his job during the day and return to the prison at night, as well as a 5-year probationary sentence after hearing his defense attorney's argument that he needed therapy, not incarceration. In the 2 years that followed, Dahmer's victim count quickly increased from 4 to 17. As he advanced, he established rituals, experimenting with chemical methods of disposal, and frequently eating the flesh of his victims. Additionally, Dahmer tried crude lobotomies by drilling muriatic acid injections into the victims' skulls while they were still alive. An Asian youngster was running naked down the street on May 27, 1991, when Dahmer's neighbor Sandra Smith phoned the police. The youngster was disoriented when the police came, so they relied on Dahmer's testimony that the boy was his 19-year-old boyfriend. Dahmer was a white guy living in a predominantly impoverished African-American neighborhood. Dahmer and the boy were taken home by the police. They clearly didn't want to get involved in a gay domestic dispute because they merely gave the area a quick glance before leaving. After the cops had departed, Dahmer killed the youngster and carried out his customary rites. The body of Tony Hughes, Dahmer's 12th victim, would have been discovered by authorities if they had even performed a minimal search. 4 additional men were killed by Dahmer prior to his eventual capture. The crime scene at Jeffrey Dahmer's arrest: refrigerator and Polaroids. After being apprehended on July 22, 1991, Dahmer's murdering rampage came to an end. Inextricably linked to Dahmer's infamous killing spree were the body parts discovered in his refrigerator and the Polaroid pictures of his victims. When they picked up Tracy Edwards, an African-American man of 32, who was wandering the streets with shackles dangling from his wrist, 2 Milwaukee police officers were directed to Dahmer. They made the decision to look into the man's accusations that he had been drugged and restrained by a strange fellow. When they got to Dahmer's residence, he politely volunteered to grab the handcuff keys. The knife that Dahmer allegedly threatened Edwards with was allegedly in the bedroom. The officer found Polaroid pictures of severed bodies when he went inside to verify the story. Later investigations turned up a head in the fridge, 3 more in the freezer, and a long list of other horrifying things like preserved skulls, jars of genitalia, and a huge collection of gruesome Polaroid pictures of his victims. After Dahmer's death in 1996, a group of Milwaukee businessmen raised more than $400,000 to buy the tools he used on his victims, such as knives, saws, handcuffs, and a refrigerator to keep body parts. In an effort to separate the city from the atrocities of Dahmer's deeds and the accompanying media circus around his trial, they swiftly destroyed them. Trial and imprisonment. In January 1992, Dahmer's trial got underway. There were significant racial tensions present because to the bulk of Dahmer's victims being African Americans. Thus, severe security measures were implemented, including an 8-foot bulletproof glass wall separating him from the gallery. Further disturbance was sparked by the jury's selection of just 1 African American, but it was quickly put under control. Throughout the entire trial, Lionel Dahmer and his second wife were present. Dahmer initially entered a not guilty plea to all charges, despite having admitted to the murders while being questioned by police. In the end, he decided to plead guilty due to insanity. The horrifying details of his actions were subsequently used in his defense as evidence that only a madman could have committed such heinous deeds. The prosecution's claim that Dahmer was fully aware of the evilness of his deeds, yet nevertheless decided to carry them out, was accepted by the jury. After deliberating for about 10 hours, they came back on February 15, 1992, and found him guilty but sane on all charges. He was given a 15-life sentence, with the option of an additional 16-life sentence added in May. Dahmer apparently adapted well to prison life despite being originally segregated from the rest of the inmates. He eventually persuaded the guards to let him interact with the other prisoners more. He discovered religion through literature and pictures that his father had sent, and the Columbia Correctional Institution gave him permission to be baptized by a local minister. Death. Dahmer was put to work with Jesse Anderson and Scarver, 2 other convicted killers, as part of his inclusion in regular work details. Guards found that Scarver had violently beaten both men with a metal bar from the prison weight room after they had been left alone to finish their jobs. After almost an hour, Dahmer was declared dead. Anderson passed away from his wounds. Scarver claimed that after being made fun of by Dahmer and Anderson while on duty, he questioned Dahmer about his misdeeds before killing the 2 men. He added that by leaving the murders unattended, jail guards contributed to their commission. In 2015, Scarver discussed his motives for killing Dahmer in an interview with the New York Post. Scarver claimed that in addition to being troubled by Dahmer's atrocities, he was also bothered by his practice of creating severed limbs out of prison food in an effort to provoke other prisoners. Jeffrey Dahmer's house. Nearly 2 decades after his passing, in August 2012, it was revealed that Dahmer was selling his childhood home in Bath, Ohio, where he had committed his first murder in 1978 and buried his victims' bones. As long as the purchaser could get past the horror aspect, the property, according to its owner, musician Chris Butler, would make a terrific house. On November 28, 1994, Christopher Scarver, a fellow prisoner, killed Dahmer. Butler listed the home for rent in March 2016 for $8,000 during the week of the Republican National Convention. According to Zillow.com, the house was no longer for sale as of July 2017. 30 years later, Milwaukee is still living with the trauma Dahmer left behind.